Hello there. You're listening to the Prisoner's Dilemma Co-operative podcast, where we encourage boycotting of the New York Times because they said the name of a guy that told us to wear masks. I'm your first co-host, Nick.
And this is your second co-host, Mike.
And this is your third co-host, Matt.
And we're going to be reading and discussing the blog series Replacing Guilt. The first one we're doing today is called Should, and that's should in air quotes, considered harmful. This is from the series Drop Your Obligations within the Replacing Guilt series. There's basically a lot of the posts that we're discussing today have the same sort of tone of the word should is actually an unhelpful word to be using, almost like a mental shortcut. You can use should to mean this is something that you ideally would do, and not doing it is a bad thing. And it is talking about how that comes across and how we can replace should with other more useful things.
In fact, I'd consider these three posts almost as a triptych, seeing the same thing from three different angles.
Exactly, and that's actually something that we noticed when we were reading it, that the first blog post is written and then the second two open with a comment on the first blog post. I think actually a lot is summed up in the first blog post, and the other two are sort of addendums or appendices to the first one.
Yeah, now that I think about it, they are sort of responses of the author, Nate, to one of his friends who... What was her problem actually? That she couldn't imagine how she would find motivation to do something if she didn't feel guilty about not doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And he sort of rewrote them in response to her problem, and then elaborated and added a lot of digressions.
Indeed, so we're probably actually going to be jumping between the three blog posts a fair amount today. So if you're keeping track at home, dear reader, we are doing should considered harmful, not because you should, and your shoulds are not a duty. And like I said, we'll probably be jumping between those three with a lot of abandon.
Also, all the three of them in the blog series itself are written by Nate Soares on his blog mindingourway.com.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, it's just I don't think we didn't actually say where the reader can find these things.
No, exactly. I mean, if they've got to episode 4 of this and they haven't picked that up, then that's interesting. But yeah, I'll make sure to leave that in the podcast when I do the editing. So the first should considered harmful opens with a discussion that you ever get that feeling where you feel like you're watching Netflix and you feel like you should be doing something else. And to analyse that, the word should is actually causing the harm. And it's like a mental shortcut, a heuristic, that it removes the actual good reason why you should be doing something else. Another example he gives is, I feel bad, I should go to the pharmacy. And the same way of a different way of saying that sentence is, if I go to the pharmacy, I will buy medication which will make me feel better. And that's quite a difference between just saying should, an obligation to yourself, and saying, if I do, I'll feel better.
Yeah, it's also something that Matt commented in the shared document that we use, that it makes us forget about reasons why a particular action needs to be taken.
Mm.
Yes, and in fact the quote is, it disconnects the reason from the task. It abolishes the why.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, now that I think about it, I think we often don't even really ever reflect about why we really think we should do X. It's just that we absorb this unconscious belief that something that we should do. We absorb it from our environment, from our social circle, and don't even reflect upon that. Definitely not in the case of I should go to the pharmacy. Definitely not necessary in this case, but in many cases I think this is the case.
Yeah, now you've said that, that reminds me of I think it's a big Eliezer Yudkowsky blog post where he talks about having a map and having a big wall of buttons that you press one of the buttons and it comes out with an opinion you should have. And similarly, I think it applies to a lot of cases. In this case, it's you're watching Netflix and you're thinking, I should be doing something else. So you press this button in your head and it comes out with the bit of paper saying, yes, you should be working on a charity or something like that. And that does remove the why.
Is this post from the sequences?
Don't think it is.
Yes.
Oh.
I think it is because I do remember it. I do remember this particular vignette.
I actually don't, but maybe this is because it is in one of the later parts to which I haven't got to.
I'll be honest, I'm doing some quick Googling while we're talking, and I'm actually not able to find it straight away, so I will put it in the show notes, everyone. Oh, there we go. It's called Maps and Buttons, Nerds versus Normies, and it's not actually by Big Yud, by somebody else. I will put that in the show notes and share it with my co-host.
Thanks a million.
No problem. The reason I bring it up, the maps versus buttons, is because if you have a big wall of buttons and you just press one, you don't have to think about it. You don't know the reasons for the opinion that comes out, and I think that's sort of related to should. If you're lying to yourself or not even thinking to yourself, like, why am I doing a lot of the actions I'm doing, that is unlikely to lead to great outcomes.
Actually, steelmanning, first, to steelman something is to try to give the best possible argumentation for it, even when it's something that is an argument against what you believe. Anyway, steelmanning this behavior, people that just sit in bed watching Netflix and push the button to receive an opinion from their brain that says, yes, you should feel bad, do that or might do that because if they actually thought about the reason, if they actually confronted the reason, they would be forced, not they might, they would be forced to either acknowledge that they prefer sitting in bed watching Netflix to whatever other thing they're supposed to do, or actually get up and doing the thing. So let's say a hypothetical situation. A college student is in his dorm room, which is filthy, and is watching Netflix. He looks at the room and he doesn't think about the fact that the room is dirty. He thinks about the fact that, oh, I'm watching Netflix, I'm wasting my time. But what he actually should do is confront the fact that he might not value having a clean room, but he can't admit it because if other people knew about it, they would think that he was a slob. Because, well, he would be.
Yeah, so are you suggesting that basically we are using shoulds to sort of maintain some kind of favorable self-image even if it makes us feel bad?
Yes.
Okay.
I can say my interpretation of that was more, if you, I don't know, dress a certain way because the people you're with make you feel guilty if you don't, then like, no, that's not a great example. But if you feel like you should dress a certain way, then try not dressing that certain way and seeing how you feel. And actually, if you don't mind, then there's no obligation. But if you look at yourself in the mirror dressed not in the normal way, and you feel like you're not showing off your natural attributes, then focus on that feeling of you want to look pretty, or you want to look good, handsome, whatever, in the good clothes, and not on the, well, I should do this because otherwise I'll look unkempt.
Nate speaks about a hypothetical situation where a person wants to buy ice cream just to have a pleasure of eating ice cream, but they feel sort of guilty because of buying ice cream because they think that they should donate this $5 or whatever is the amount of money that would like to spend on this pleasure to like effective altruism or against malaria foundation. And I thought that maybe we actually use shoulds to maintain a favorable self-image because either I can think in the following way: I can buy ice cream and I buy this ice cream, but I acknowledge that actually I should give this money to Against Malaria Foundation instead and just blame my acrasia, that is my weakness of will. I know I should give this money to some charity, but I don't do it because I just don't have enough willpower. Or I can acknowledge that actually it's just that after weighing both options, I decided that I actually prefer like having 2 bowls of ice cream over adding some probably much greater from this person's perspective benefit to their lives, like supplying them with water for 2 weeks. like some kid in Africa. And in the first case, I am less honest about my actual motivations, but I can present it in this way, maintaining a more favorable image of myself. Like I don't actually acknowledge that that I value my pleasure over some increase in well-being of some people, of some person that I don't know. I just say that I really would like to help someone instead of satisfying myself, but I don't have enough willpower.
Yeah, it's something Nate said at the end of the first podcast, end of the first blog post, rather, thank you. Yeah. It relates to what he says later, that obviously buying an ice cream is not as good, in big air quotes, as donating money to the Against Malaria Foundation. But a lot of the time when you're thinking should in your head, the action that you're not encouraging yourself to take, you will mark as negative infinity, which doesn't give you an escape avenue. It's like, well, I should donate the money to an effective charity, or I'm a bad person. And I think it's a really useful tool to, when you realise you're saying should, say to yourself, hang on, if I don't do the thing I'm saying should to, is that actually negative infinity, or is that actually a very small negative that is easy to overcome or make up for, or is it so small that it doesn't actually matter?
Yeah, and now that you mentioned, like thinking and maybe even explicitly saying to other people, communicating that if I don't do the thing that I should do, then I am a terrible person. Actually, I think that very often just self-flagellation, and explicit self-flagellation in one way or another, is very often used. It's very often used, maybe even most often used, just for social signaling. Like, see how much I hate myself, how much I perversely modest and humble in this way.
Yes, look at how guilty I feel. This means that I really must be a saint that has had a moment of relapse. And
that I acknowledge my shortcomings.
Yes, and it also feels like a trail towards needing to maintain a consistent self-image all the time, which I think is something that Nate Soares mentioned in previous blog posts, that his advice was that one should not feel pressured to be completely and perfectly self-consistent all the time, because that way lies madness. Because in the example of the ice cream, a good person would value the giving €2 to the Against Malaria Foundation more than having an ice cream. But is that actually true? Or are we just thinking good person in a more general way and just setting it to the maximum, that a maximally good person will actually forego ice cream and give those €2 to charity, while a regular good person or ourselves just want to eat the ice cream more? But the problem is that we would prefer to have a self-image as a maximally good person, even when it's not really sane, even when it's madness to do so.
Nate actually had predicted this exact conversation. One of the last entries that we're going to be discussing is called The Value of a Life. And it touches on this, that, it is figuratively and practically impossible for somebody to just donate every single extra penny they have to charity. As easily as you could click your fingers and solve Alzheimer's, it's as easy to never buy yourself an ice cream, never eat anything other than Huel or something like that, and donate all your extra money to charity.
Yeah, which is why the effective altruists. Okay, I beg the editing to keep that in.
I do. We'll make a sacrifice to the editing gods.
Okay. That's why the effective altruism movement suggests donating a maximum of 10% of your income to charity. That is really the maximum. You should not, and we're talking about should a lot, but you should not donate more than 10% of what you make to charity.
It's not optimal to aim for it.
Well, my understanding of it is that 10% is like a very good Schelling point, a point that everyone can sort of agree on. If you're, somebody like Bill Gates or whoever, you can afford to donate a lot more. And if you're at university, you should probably be donating 1%, if anything. But 10% is a very good amount that a lot of people can agree on. And actually, another author we like, Scott Alexander, wrote a blog post about this element of donating money to charity and things like that, which me and Matt both started posting in the group chat at the same time. So we'll put it in the show notes. If you're in the rationalist or EA sphere already, you're probably already aware of this, but it's called Nobody is Perfect, Everything is Commensurable.
Maybe we could read one of the last paragraphs from this Scott's post, because I think it's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
From Nobody is Perfect, Everything is Commensurable by Scott Alexander. It's 10% because definitions were made for men, not men for definitions. And if we define good person in a way such that everyone is sitting around miserable because they can't reach an unobtainable standard, we are stupid definition makers. If you are smart definition makers, we will define it in whichever way, which makes it the most effective tool to convince people to give at least that much. Finally, it's 10% because if you believe in something like universalizability as a foundation for morality, a world in which everybody gives 10% of their income to charity is a world where about $7 trillion go to charity a year. Solving global poverty forever is estimated to cost about 100 billion a year for the couple decade length of the project. That's about 2% of the money that would suddenly become available. If charity got $7 trillion a year, the first year would give us enough to solve global poverty, eliminate all treatable diseases, fund research into the untreatable ones for approximately the next forever, educate anybody who needs educating, feed anybody who needs feeding, fund an unparalleled renaissance in the arts, permanently save every rainforest in the world, and have enough left over to launch 5 or 6 different manned missions to Mars. That would be the first year. Goodness only knows what would happen in year 2. By contrast, if everybody in the world retweeted the latest hashtag campaign, Twitter would break.
Again, something I said in the first episode is a lot of what Nate Soares says is about kind of being good enough rather than being perfect. And I think this is tied to that, because if you donate 10% of your time or money or something like that to charity, I think it's fair to say you're doing enough, you're doing good enough, and you can treat yourself to the odd ice cream.
And also you can feel confident that you're giving approximately 1,000 times more money in percentage-wise than Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like it'd be more than that, but yeah, I definitely agree with that. Just one final thing he said on the first blog post that stuck with me is that you can consider tallying up how many times you say or think the word should. You could even get like a little counter for this. And then once you've started to notice it, you can begin to unpack the sentence and say, why am I saying should here? Would it be better to rephrase a sentence as, I want to do this thing because of all the benefits it gives me?
Actually, I have something to say about this particular quote.
Go ahead.
About unpacking the word should. Because a tactic that I use whenever I'm feeling anxious is unpacking the exact thing that's making me anxious. So if somebody were to feel anxious because they feel that they are behind on their studies or whatever, take a breather and consider, if I haven't studied enough, what happens? I will fail the class. If I fail the class, what happens? Well, I still already have done these and these exams. It will take me slightly more time to get a degree, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not going to be a disaster. And that helps out a lot, because I feel that a lot of anxiety is about very general, very vague things, and just about feelings and not about things. I don't know if you guys have also run into this feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, what Nate says and what I commented earlier of saying, bad things are not infinitely bad. It's useful if you can actually take a breather and think about it and think, what are the actual ramifications of whatever bad thing happening? And it's generally not as bad as your brain is assuming it will be.
Yeah, although I think we are also sometimes expected to act or profess a belief that some things are actually of infinite value, even if they shouldn't be treated as such.
Yes, I've actually run into this at work via peer pressure, like acting as if, okay, purely hypothetically, and I remind the reader that this is completely hypothetical. If a shipment of material were to be given to a client which is defective, acting as if it's the complete end of the world, when instead it is a very bad look for the company. It might damage client relations and so on, but this client is not the only client, and there are specific reasons why the shipment was still shipped, which might actually have to do with management itself.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually asked for reader feedback on this, on whether their own work history they've encountered this type of behavior from their coworkers, acting if something is a matter of life and death on the job when it actually isn't.
I mean, I think we've all, not necessarily in work, but we've all experienced that where, I don't want to resort to stereotype, but the Karen meme of, something not being quite to the way of their liking and they're acting as if it's the most horrific thing they've ever experienced. And it's just a lack of perspective in all the problems in the world and all the problems even in your country that I suppose is coming from a position of privilege, that if somebody does, cut you off in traffic, that is the worst thing that's going to happen to you all week, then you adjust your behaviour because it is the worst thing that's going to happen to you all week.
Yeah, I mean, if the worst thing that happens to you is that somebody cuts you off in traffic, you're going to have a very good week.
Yeah.
Absolutely, but I think brains and humans are very good at sort of normalising whatever level of stress you're at. And if you live an incredibly stress-free life, then the first bit of stress that hits you will hit you very hard. As if somebody with a normal life gets knocked off their bike or something like that. It's a much bigger stress than they're used to. That's why they react so explosively.
Oh, you said Karen, not Karen. I was very confused because for a moment I thought that you were talking about the ferryman of the dead.
No, I'm not.
No, and I was like, oh, come on. Why would a mythological figure be worried about being cut off in traffic?
I'm not that cultured, Mike, but I'm flattered by that.
No. I mean, it's on my mind because I play Paid by Supergiant Games, and so he's the guy that from whom you buy stuff, and who gives you a loyalty card if you beat him up.
Actually, I don't think Karen would be very bothered by traffic. As far as I remember, he is the only one who regularly passes through sticks.
Yeah, it's true, because the other psychopomps go through their own ways.
So sorry, what was Psychopomp?
Psychopomp. It's the guy, the spirit that moves dead souls to the afterlife. There's a bunch of them.
Is that a word? Well, yeah,
Yes, it's. I mean, I learned about it in Gunnar Krieg Court, which is a.
Oh, the webcomic.
Which is a webcomic, yes. In Greek mythology, a guide of souls to the place of the dead. Because there's Charon, there's Hermes, there's Thanatos. There's a bunch of these spirits that do this job. In fact, I wonder if they have a union.
I've got to be honest, I heard the word psychopomp and had it explained to me. I googled it, thinking this would make a great band name, and there's already several bands with that name. So, but it's actually a real thing. That's such an odd word, meaning about the underworld and death and things like that. Psychopomp. Anyway, we may possibly be slightly off topic. We should get back on topic. Yeah. Or if we get back on topic, we can lose no more readers who have already like turned off their podcast app in disgust about our long segues. So we kind of covered the should considered harmful. The next blog post he has is not because you should. And the first thing he talks about here is one of his friends who has a dirty room and they feel like they should keep their room tidy. And they said, don't keep your room tidy for a week and see how you feel. And if it doesn't bother you, then you don't have to tidy your room. But if you feel uncomfortable in your room because it's dirty, then yes, that's the positive reason why you should be cleaning your room.
Maybe actually sometimes people get so much used to being motivated by shoots and by the sense of guilt that they completely forget that there are alternative sources of motivations to do things like cleaning your room or going to work, and they just can't imagine being motivated by some internal drive or some external but positive drive, like striving towards something rather than away from something.
In that kind of mental mindset might be called depression. I'm thinking this because lack of care in one's own surroundings and a general lack of self-care and of the places you inhabit is a symptom of depression. I want to say the stereotype, but a depressive person is more likely to live in a dirty home and not take care of themselves.
Indeed.
Yes.
I don't know if he talks about it in this whole series, but he does sort of touch on it about how willpower, you have a very limited resource of willpower, and I think should is using that willpower to make yourself do things, which isn't a very effective or sustainable way of doing anything. If you can instead remind yourself like what energy you get from, for example, cleaning your room, you can save that willpower for something else.
It's also not the most efficient way to use your willpower. Willpower is not something that should be spent on doing things that you do regularly, but rather on things that come up and it's to that are irregular and surprising. If there is something that comes up regularly in your life, then you should set up a system about it. About which there is also a great blog post which we can link in the show notes.
Something he says is just a throwaway line, but I think it's a very good reminder, is that should is for a retrospective and not for actually deliberation. So when you look back, you say, yes, when I look with hindsight at all the evidence I had, I should have done something else. But you shouldn't ever use it when you're deciding what to do. I think that's just a useful thing to, again, prime your brain with, to say I shouldn't use should only after when I'm looking back.
Yeah, and it also made me think that it's actually quite funny, kind of, that should is actually a past form of shall. So maybe this is a clue that initially it was mainly used as referring to something that we should have done in the past, but not the things that we should do actually in the moment. Only later it evolved and got kind of appropriated to be used in the present tense. Maybe we could maybe I will do some research about that, but it seems to me like an interesting hypothesis.
Yeah, like a verb that is, I am supposed to be doing something else right now, not actually having a present tense, because you wouldn't be saying that in a conversation. I wonder, this reminds me of the difference between European languages and Chinese, that Chinese does not actually have tenses per se, but just has the verb and the date in which it happened or it will happen, which is interesting effects on psychology.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you never say, I am going to do X. You say, I do X tomorrow.
Yeah.
Nice. It's almost like Newspeak from 1984, where the actual language controls you. Not to say that China is anything like 1984. We love China on this podcast. Please don't ban us from your country.
Yes, China is great.
China has done nothing wrong.
Especially if you're an Uyghur.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear they're great. Oh God, I think that's... I think we may have gone too far there. I think we're going to have to close down the podcast. We've cancelled ourselves.
No, I think that canceling is if the left does it. If secret assassins in the dead of the night do it, it's called suicide.
Yeah.
If you shoot yourself in the back of the head 40 times, it's
Yeah,
suicide.
like,
Got it.
it's
Yeah.
like we were.
Yeah. Oh, this happened recently in Italy. Katri Kala, an Italian politician, recently died of suicide by handgun. Fun.
Well, I'm assuming it was very clearly not suicide.
It's kind of a murky waters because he was just given a very important position in the government as overseer of public projects. But I mean, from what the official news media said, they're treating it as an actual suicide. So it might be a suicide. On the other hand, I mean, especially Italy doesn't have a lot of guns, so it's kind of suspicious that this person would shoot themselves in the head.
I'm going to drag us kicking and screaming back into the topic.
Yes, please.
Nate comes out with an example of somebody pre-committing to never doing anything because they should, i.e. giving money to charity or something like that. They might feel relieved because they don't actually care about any of their shoulds, which is probably unlikely, or they feel hollow or fear because they might never do anything to help others again. But if you're worried that might be you, then you can always listen to the part that says, when will I help others, and understand that your brain giving you a shortcut of saying should, but actually this is a time when you should take the longer road and think, it's the time of the month when I would normally give to charity. Am I going to give to charity? Rather than, oh, I should give to charity. And again, for me, there wasn't a lot of discussion with that. It just sort of made sense, and it's something to try. Again, dear reader, if you want to try committing to never making yourself do anything by should, give it a go and let us know how that went.
Yes, we'll be sure to record the results for posterity at least.
Until we're all shot and by China, and this is all deleted mysteriously in several mysterious fires at different locations.
对不起，您要找的人现在不在座位上。
Anyway, going back on topic, there's a short part that I wanted to talk about, and I'm going to quote. Imagine you're trying to solve an algebra problem with the following method. Say to yourself, the answer is going to be x equals 17. I know it! Look at the problem. The problem is 2x equals 12. Solve for x. Conclude the answer is x equals 6. And then feel really, really guilty because x wasn't 17. End quote. This feels very much like the pseudo-scientific woo things like The Secret. Like if you believe enough in something, it will happen. Except that why does this philosophy have so much traction? Because I think that in social situations, this actually works. Like in situations where the most important part of the landscape is your own feelings, like, I don't know, asking a person out, whether you say to yourself, I am going to ask that person out, I know it, will give you the courage to actually do it. However, this doesn't work in anything else. It only works when applied to people and situations, and social situations.
I agree.
My initial guess about that would be rather something like schizophrenia, but I think your association is also valid.
I mean, it's also something that I'm learning a lot in the workplace, since that's where I spend most of my time, is that a lot of the times there are eminently solvable problems that are never solved because the person whose responsibility the problem is doesn't have the backbone, they doesn't actually believe themselves enough, or believes that the problem is impossible to solve, and so it just never gets solved. Like, and there might be objective problems, like the machine does an analysis every 6 minutes, ergo 10 analysis an hour and you're asked to do 15 analysis an hour. In which case, a hypothetical person, me, would go to the boss with the calculator and say, look, this is how many analysis the machine can do. This is how many samples come in every day. This is a problem. This is not sustainable. A good employee would also add, we can do X, Y, and Z. We can examine every other sample. We can do a shorter analysis and so on. But before you give the solution, you also need to acknowledge that the problem is there, which is something that I have seen not done very much.
Yeah, it reminds me of a similar thing I hear sometimes where people say, oh, I've tried everything, and I really want to go to them and say, oh, tell me 5 things you've tried. And has one of those things been sitting down for 10 minutes with a bit of paper and just writing out every solution you can think of to that problem? And it's called 10 minutes by the clock, and it works very well if you haven't tried it already.
Yeah. And also how many of these things that they tried are, how much are they actually different, or how much are they just repeating the same thing, like trying to put a square peg in a circular hole.
Mm.
Yeah, or even just forcing this square peg in a circular hole, being full of despair because it's so hard, and not thinking that, okay, maybe we don't have time to think about it, but it needs to be thought over. Okay, I will make an investment of time to improve my situation. Actually, yes, even just learning how to use Microsoft Excel effectively. I've campaigned for this. I have literally had, I have had to literally, metaphorically point a gun to a person's head to make them sit down for 15 minutes and explain to them how to use pivot tables, which they now use to save themselves hours of time.
I do find people are very reluctant to try something new outside of their comfort zone.
Yes, and those people are called losers.
Or normies, or other
Baselines.
Muggles.
Yeah, we'll go with Muggles. I think that's like that's also baseline. I feel like Muggle is a bit racist.
I mean, being good with technology is modern magic. People treat being able to work with computers as magic. A cell phone is a wand. A tablet is a staff. You're summoning demons and writing in an arcane language that nobody understands. It's magic. So,
I do hear that, but the thing is, like, anyone can learn how to use a computer properly, whereas a Muggle can't learn how to use magic.
Anybody might be able to learn, but anybody can learn, but not everyone will. And I actually dispute they can, because I've seen blinders on people's minds that are impressive.
Absolutely. We definitely need to come up with a term that we can describe Muggles with.
Yes.
That isn't Muggles, but shall we carry on with the blog post, gentlemen?
Yes. In fact, I think that we can go on to the next blog post.
Yeah, so the next blog post is your shoulds are not a duty, and I think we've actually covered a lot of it in the discussion already. I'll say 2 things that jumped out at me. One is that he uses a word called authorities. That's authorities.
Yes, I was about to say that. It's fantastic.
Which is this, I suppose in context, it's this imaginary authority that tells you what you ought and ought not to do. And actually that authority is just you in your mind. And sometimes the situation forces you to pick between one bad option or an even worse option. But that's the situation doing that. The authority doesn't enter into it. It's how you, dear reader, act in that situation in the way that you think is best.
Yeah, he kind of presents this with a tongue in the cheek, but I think we often act like there were such authorities, and this could be blamed on our active agency detection, like we are trying to see patterns in the clouds, and human-like beings acting in phenomena that are not caused by any human-like beings' activities.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Although I'm just going to blame society. Like the authorities is society.
I think it is partly society and also partly brain. Although I suppose we're getting into sort of free will arguments here and how society can be almost entirely decide any action you take because of how it raised you and things like that. But let's not talk about free will just yet.
Yeah, we're not fated to do that yet.
Very good. Although it is a conversation I have very often about if free will exists, and spoilers, it doesn't. But he sort of touches on this, Nate, by saying your shoulds are not written in the heavens, your shoulds are written in you. You can't cure Alzheimer's with a click of your fingers, and similarly, you can't make yourself do things that you aren't motivated to do, and no amount of should will actually overcome that impossibility.
I mean, it might be helpful to also see it as under a totalitarian regime, your shoulds would be very different. I can only think of China, but if you were in China...
China, who we love.
Yes, who we love very much. In fact, I actually can speak a little bit of Chinese and have the HSK1 certification. Anyway, in China, you should report your neighbor to the authorities if they're doing antisocial activities like planning a rebellion or using
like Winnie the Pooh pictures or
a virtual. Yes. In communist China, you are supposed to go to the cops if you see your neighbor's child playing with Winnie the Pooh, so that they will come over and hit him and possibly kill him. That is what you should do if you were there. But that shows how mutable shoulds are. Shoulds are dependent on where you are in life. Yeah, like Nate Soares says, they're not written in the heavens.
And it's not should is not a true moral commitment to anything. You know, you could argue you should never lie, but again, if you're in Nazi Germany and the Nazis come and say you're hiding Jews under your house, you should lie and say, no, I'm not. There are no Jews here.
These are not the Jews that you're looking for. Yes.
Or any Jews at all. I wonder if there's a fan fiction or something of just like Jedis ending up in Nazi Germany.
Actually, I'm sure there is, but it's probably low quality. But now I'm curious.
A lot of fan fiction is low quality.
Well, yes, but I mean, it's something that I've seen, that if you're looking for a specific piece of fan fiction, like fan fiction that is a crossover between two fandoms, that has this character, that is of this particular age range, and so on, you are going to find it because there's such a huge amount of fan fiction written, but you're already putting on so many different parameters that you're going to sacrifice quality even more.
Indeed, yeah. So that's all 3 blog posts, and it just, again, just really hammering home the badness of the word should, and how ideally every time you say it, you notice it, and you analyse the sentence it comes from, and you can turn it around and actually remind yourself of all the positive you can do if you choose a different action rather than saying the moral obligation is to do this thing. That is the discussion for today. If you've got something to say, come and chat with us somewhere online, on Discord, Facebook. We're probably going to have a Reddit at some point, or you can email us at prisonersdilemma.cooperators@gmail.com, and that's all one word with no punctuation other than the @ symbol and the .com. Next week, we are going to be discussing working yourself ragged is not a virtue, and rest in motion, which is probably my favourite entry in the whole series. As tradition, we normally say something all at the same time, which gives our audio engineer a massive headache. I really liked the point that was made that if you're saying should, the implication there is that the thing that you're saying you shouldn't do is infinitely bad. But if you remind yourself that actually if you do what you want to rather than what you should do, the bad thing isn't infinitely bad. So shall we try saying bad things are not infinitely bad?
Yes.
Okay, right. So 3, 2, 1. Bad things are not infinitely bad. Oh, so bad.
One day we will do it.
One day we will make it.
One day
we should make it. Sorry, Matt.
That was so bad, but not infinitely bad.
It was so bad, but not infinitely bad. Congratulations for actually catching the meaning of all the blog posts we've been reading. So our thanks go to Nate Soares, who wrote the original series of blog posts.
To Gianluca Truda, who turned them into a podcast.
The host of the Base and Conspiracy podcast, who recommended this series.
And thousands of other units of help that they have provided.
Thank you to the Council of the Guild of Servants who encouraged us to produce this podcast.
Right, bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye, cheers.
Okay.
Bye.